Hello and welcome to another episode of Current Events with Avi.
Hi, I'm Avi.
So today we're going to be talking about a few different things, and we're going to start with some of the big news recently this month, which is the coronavirus outbreak.
Yeah, it's really spread quite quickly at this point. Just last week, there were only maybe a few thousand cases. As of, believe yesterday, it's nearly infected about maybe 5,000, 4,500 people and killed about 100 as compared to 830 last Friday. So very big, very rapid spreading in China at least.
Yeah, so right now most of the cases and obviously deceased are in China, as that's where the outbreak originated, but there have been some cases reported around the world, and there at the moment have been about 5 that have been found in the US.
Yeah, right now we don't know exactly too much about it, but authorities from China say that the virus is in its quote incubation period, which means that it's before symptoms really show, so it's quite difficult to contain at this point. The virus is in fact so new, it's just called the coronavirus, which is just a type of virus, right? So SARS was a coronavirus, MERS was a coronavirus, but this one is so new we can't even classify it. We just call it the coronavirus. So we don't know how it spreads. We do know that it has come from a live animal market in Wuhan, China, but aside from that, that's all we really know.
And so, of course, as the outbreak originated in Wuhan, China, the risk to the general American public is rather low, and it's still rather low for most other countries. However, most countries recommend that you don't travel to China
Which is
for
just common
rather
sense.
obvious reasons.
Yeah. Right, the CDC is advising don't travel to China, and they're saying the risk to Americans is, quote, relatively low. So China has, of course, they've quarantined entire cities. I think right now it's about 60 million people who've been affected by the quarantine, and they're pushing the lunar year. So I think they're making pretty good efforts in order to contain the virus. So they're preventing it at home. But for the U.S., I think right now we're relatively safe.
Yeah, I wouldn't really be too worried about picking up this kind of infection just walking around.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're traveling, make sure to take some precautions, stay safe. But however, this has had some impact on the economy. I mean, if you're looking at the stock market
Yes,
at all, we've
stocks and various different things like the Nasdaq have S&P 500 have, I wouldn't say tumbled, but they've definitely had seen a significant decrease as opposed to where before the outbreak of the coronavirus. So I think a lot of it might have been just because of the media saying, "Oh, it's a coronavirus, it's killing people," and it's kind of conjuring images of SARS 17 years ago. So it's creating a panic, right? You've seen mortgage rates fall. So it's hurting the economy, but I think once people realize it doesn't pose an imminent threat to them, or rather opposed to other people around the world, localized in China, I think it'll eventually rebound.
Yeah, and right now I'm looking at the moment, and it seems like we're starting to get some rebounding here right now, actually, as more efforts have been taken to contain the outbreak, and people are starting to feel a little bit more safe about what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
So then, moving on to our next topic, Avi.
Um. So in Iraq, you can cut that little pause out. Okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
So the U.S. embassy in Iraq was hit by a rocket attack. I believe it was 2 days ago, which injured 3 people. No group at this point has claimed responsibility. However, Washington has repeatedly blamed Iran-backed militia, Iran, Iranian-backed militia factions in Iraq. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know particularly too much about this, as it's been kind of overshadowed by a lot of the other happenings, but I think it's just a real general reflection of the growing tensions in the Middle East region. We've seen a lot of ramping up of tensions recently with the downed plane and just really everything going on there. So it's looking like the relations are starting to boil over a bit there.
Yeah, it went a little bit dormant for a few weeks, right? Soleimani happened, there was a panic, and then kind of died down, I guess. And then suddenly again, you have this, and then you have riots are still continuing in Iraq. There's a lot of unstable leadership in the area. So it occurred in the quote green zone, which was, I guess, is considered to be a flashpoint for wider regional tensions between the U.S. and Iran in recent weeks. So it's definitely, I think, indicative of the crisis going on there, and it's something of concern. But it's also hard to assess how far this could go and what its implications could be.
Okay. And then, so on a slightly different note, London police have recently begun deploying live facial recognition technology to help spot criminals rather quickly in the targeted areas.
Yeah, so basically what happens is when the camera flags an individual, police officers will approach them immediately and ask them to verify their identity. If they're on the watch list, they'll be arrested. And
Nice.
so I think in a lot of ways this is kind of a big brother kind of issue. It's now we've seen this in like, you know, undemocratic regimes like China, which is honestly kind of expected. Of course, when there's a large consolidation of power, you're going to see this. But now we're seeing this kind of technology emerging into pretty full-fledged democracies like England. So I think it's somewhat concerning.
Yeah, I think for me, while I understand the purpose, to me it just feels kind of a bit more like a real invasion of privacy, right? Like security cameras, you can understand they're general, they're not going to focus on anything specific, but with this, it's scanning the crowd, it's looking for specific people, and I mean, it could hit you accidentally. There is definitely a chance of a misflag, in which case, you're going to be put through a hassle for absolutely no reason.
Yeah, I believe it was just last year, maybe a little over that, Britain tried a very similar kind of thing. It was a facial recognition technology that was, of course, only in its early stages, but that technology failed 80% of the time, which is really a staggering number. So, I mean, they're trying again, and you're sure they might have improved the technology, and they're good now. But it's it's concerning that the same nation that has such a giant failure is now saying that they're going to monitor their citizens and suddenly reduce crime. It's really just concerning.
Yeah, it's not really giving me any comfort to the idea that they've made any improvements. I mean, like, sure, like you said, in a year they could have improved, but honestly doubt that they've made such a significant improvement that they're 100% sure. I feel like we're going to end up with another kind of trial phase where they are, take it down, do some tweaking, and then probably bring it back again.
Another issue I have with this is that these kinds of systems are often like racially biased. They're misused by the police. Like lots of times, AI pick up on the racist tendencies that have been present in human population for a long time. So, I mean, if that happened, it's essentially a quote unquote perfect computer is now essentially racially profiling people, which is once again really concerning.
Yeah, and so I think that's all we're going to talk about for World News Day. And so, domestically, the big news over this past week has, of course, been the Trump impeachment trial.
Yeah. Of course, it's going to be hard to comprehensively cover impeachment because every single day, the impeachment trial constantly changes. New facts emerge, different opinions emerge, all these kinds of things. But we'll try our best to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
So as of today, as of the recording of this podcast, Trump's legal team will wrap up their opening arguments in the ongoing Senate trial. I guess the controversy right now is whether or not to allow the calling of more witnesses. There's also a quote explosive book by John Bolton that alleges quid pro quo with Ukraine, and I don't know what to say about it at this point because I feel like once something emerges and it's like, oh well, I didn't really know him anyways, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to label your book explosive. I feel like maybe you're overhyping what's going on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because it's like you have to get your message out, so you have to label it in this kind of way. But at the same time, if you're labeling it this way, how can it be? How legitimate can it actually be? And right, so and how legitimate are these accusations at all, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, like,
right.
a lot of these things kind of hinge on secondhand, not secondhand sources per se, but no direct connections. It's more connecting the dots to say that these facts put together prove it. And so I feel like even if there's maybe some evidence in the book, I feel like it's not going to be like the concrete smoking gun, like, oh yeah, I have a written statement from him saying that we're going to trade, this military aid for an investigation.
Yeah, it's just a bit suspect that he's had this time to write all this entire book, and he hasn't said one peep about this ongoing process when he was quite literally the National Security Council, like former, of course, but for the Trump administration, didn't really seem to have any kind of moral quandaries then, but now suddenly when the impeachment trial is ramping up, oh, well, I have a whole book of explosive facts, so you should definitely take a look at it.
So I think that's all we're going to talk about for impeachment today. Of course, I would say the best way to really get informed about this is to first off just watch the trial. I know it's not exactly exciting per se, but it is important. And if you don't really have the time for that, I would highly recommend just reading some summaries or some, breakdowns of what's been happening recently.
I would definitely recommend watching, the senators' vote on February 29th. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, so definitely check that out.
But anyways, thanks for listening. This
Yep.
has been David Situ for the Octagon.